If it's not about sports, I find it very hard to concentrate.
What is up, guys? It's Braden here from Dragon King Sports, and today we are talking about the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome, which was a stadium located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is, of course, the 4th edition of my Dead Stadium series. By the end of the 1970s, the Minnesota Vikings of the NFL were looking to move out of Metropolitan Stadium, which was too small for NFL crowds. The NFL-AFL merger had been completed in 1966, and the NFL would require that NFL stadiums have a minimum capacity of 50,000 seats. This was a problem for the Vikings, as Metropolitan Stadium could not be expanded beyond 49,700 and only had a capacity of 48,000 at the time this rule was made by the NFL. Memorial Stadium, where the University of Minnesota Golden Gophers football team played at the time, had a capacity of 56,000. However, the Vikings refused to play there, even temporarily. Met Stadium, as it was often called, was also where the Minnesota Twins of Major League Baseball played. They too were looking to upgrade. In 1973, a committee called the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce Stadium Task Force was appointed to evaluate options for a new sports facility. By this point, both the Vikings and Twins were threatening to leave Minnesota if a new stadium wasn't built. And so in 1977, State Representative Al Patton sponsored a stadium bill which authorized Governor Rudy Perpich to appoint a 7-member commission to choose a location and hire an architectural firm to draw up a design. The commission was given 3 options. The first was to remodel Metropolitan Stadium so that seating could be expanded and also so that it could be used for all sports, which would cost $25 million. The second option was to spend $37.5 million to remodel Metropolitan Stadium for just baseball and build a football stadium next to it. And the third option was to spend up to $55 million to build a stadium in a new location. The committee chose the third option, creating Industry Square Development Corporation, which developed a 25-acre plot of land on the east side of Minneapolis for $14.5 million. In December of 1978, an approval vote from the commission was received to approve the site of the new stadium. The then recent construction of the Pontiac Silverdome in the mid-1970s proved that dome stadiums for cold weather climates was not only feasible but also preferential, and so the Vikings wanted it to be a dome stadium as their previous stadium was open air. The Minnesota Twins were also set to be tenants, and a climate-controlled indoor domed venue was better for baseball in the early part of the season and the late part of the season when it could get quite cold. Construction began on December 20th, 1979. It was primarily funded through hotel taxes, liquor taxes, and from local donations from businesses in the area. The stadium was named in honor of Hubert H. Humphrey, former mayor of Minneapolis and also a U.S. senator whom sadly passed away in 1978. The official name was the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome. The Metrodome would cost $68 million, which was actually way less than was allocated in the funding. Construction was completed in 1982 and officially opened on April 3rd of that year. Now, the Vikings played their first game at the Metrodome on August 21st, 1982, which was a preseason game against the Seattle Seahawks, which they won 7-3. The first regular season Vikings game at the Metrodome was on September 12th, 1982, a 17-10 victory over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. An NFL playoff game also took place in the Metrodome that season on January 9th, 1983, in which the Vikings beat the Atlanta Falcons 30-24. As previously mentioned, the Minnesota Twins baseball team also played there, and fans liked watching games there because it was an escape from the humidity and bugs that were a plague of summer times in the Midwest. The Twins would actually win 2 World Series championships at the Metrodome too, one in 1987 and one in 1991. The building insulated cheers, which made the venue seem louder, which gave a significant advantage to the Twins. The Twins played their first game there on April 6, 1982, which was an 11-7 loss to the Seattle Mariners. In addition to the Vikings and Twins playing there, the University of Minnesota football and baseball teams played there too, and it even hosted some high school games, particularly in October of 1991, when an early season blizzard closed most outdoor fields in the Twin Cities area. It was even open to people wanting to exercise by walking or running the concourse in the winter months. The Metrodome had no air conditioning in its first year, causing summer baseball games and early season football games to be extremely uncomfortable. Fans jokingly referred to the Metrodome as the Sweat Dome during that first season. Just like we talked about with the Pontiac Silverdome, heavy snow caused problems with the Metrodome's roof. Several of these incidents took place in the 1980s. On November 19, 1981, 5 months before the stadium had even officially opened, the roof collapsed due to over a foot of snow accumulating on the roof. And the roof, just like the Silverdome's, was held up by pressurized air, and it deflated on December 30th, 1982. A crane had torn a hole in it while removing snow. On April 14, 1983, a late spring snowstorm hit Minneapolis, and another tear in the roof caused it to deflate once again. The Twins were actually scheduled to play the California Angels that day, and the game had to be postponed. And finally, on April 26, 1986, the Metrodome's roof would once again have a hole form in the roof, but this time it was due to extremely high winds. The incident took place during a Twins game against the Angels, which caused a 9-minute delay in the bottom of the 7th inning, but luckily the roof did not deflate in this particular instance. The roof was made of 2 layers actually. The outer layer was Teflon-coated fiberglass and the interior layer was acoustical fabric. This meant that there was dead air space between the 2 layers. To prevent any more roof collapses or deflations, hot air was pumped into that dead air space. Stadium workers were often tasked with the arduous process of climbing to the roof and using steam and high-powered hoses that would spray hot water in order to melt the snow. A unique and somewhat goofy feature of the Metrodome was the fact that to convert it from football to baseball, 7,600 seats were retractable, which caused a huge wall of seats along the right field. In addition, prior to the 1994 season, the dugouts were moved closer in, which allowed for 3 more rows of seats. A 200-foot curtain was often put in the upper deck of the right field too to cover up the empty seats. The playing surface was originally super turf, but the surface was way too bouncy, with ground rule doubles happening frequently. Football and baseball players both complained about the playing surface. The super turf was replaced with AstroTurf in 1987. It remained AstroTurf for over a decade, but was later replaced with Field Turf in 2004. The Metrodome was known by MLB fans as a ballpark that was considered to be very batter-friendly due to a low left field fence, which was only 343 feet from home plate, and a right field fence that was a bit higher, but closer to home plate at 327 feet. A big part of maintaining the stadium was making sure the air pressure that held up the Metrodome stayed the same and didn't drop. Because of this, fans had to enter and exit the seating areas through revolving doors because regular doors would cause air to escape too quickly and thus deflate the roof. The roof was also unusually low to the playing field, which caused a unique situation for baseball games. Major League Baseball outlined rules that dictated if a ball struck the roof, it still remained in play, unless it struck the roof and then fell into foul territory. If a ball became caught in the roof or did not come back down, it would be a ground rule double. This particular instance only occurred 3 times though, once being in a college baseball game. The white roof also made it a challenge to catch fly balls, as the ball often became lost in the whiteness of the roof. When converting the Metrodome from baseball to football, the pitcher's mound was lowered by an electric motor. The mound weighed 23,000 pounds, which is a whole lot more than I expected, to be honest with you. The sliding pits around the bases were also removed when transforming it to a football configuration. The Minnesota Golden Gophers football team also played at the Metrodome, but the Twins had priority over them when their schedules happened to overlap, usually as a result of the Twins playing in the MLB postseason. However, there were instances where the Twins and Gophers football team used the Metrodome on the same exact day. The Twins would begin about 11 o'clock in the morning, and the Gophers would begin at about 6 p.m. However, the Vikings had priority over the Twins, except in the case of World Series games. In fact, in 1987, the Vikings' home game against the Buccaneers had to be moved to Tampa due to the Twins playing in Game 2 of the World Series at the Metrodome that day. They also had a scheduling conflict for Game 7 too, with the Vikings' home game against the Denver Broncos having to be pushed back to Monday night. However, the Vikings had priority in 2009 when the Twins had an AL Central tiebreaker game scheduled against the Detroit Tigers, but it had to be played on a different day due to the Vikings' home game. Starting in the 1990s, the Twins began looking for a new home, wanting their own stadium without having to worry about late-season conflicts with the Vikings and Gophers. However, it would not be until 2009 that the Twins would play their last game there, after construction was completed on their new home, Target Field. The Minnesota Timberwolves of the NBA played their first and only season at the Metrodome in the 89-90 season, which was a huge venue for basketball. In fact, they set an NBA attendance record on April 17, 1990, with a crowd of 49,551 spectators, who turned up to see their Timberwolves lose to the Denver Nuggets by a score of 99-88. That was the final ever game there for the Wolves, as they moved to their new and current home, the Target Center, the following season. The Metrodome hosted the 1985 MLB All-Star Game, Super Bowl XXVI in 1992, and the NCAA Men's Final Four in 1992 and 2001. The Metrodome had an official capacity of 64,172 people, but a few times the Gophers football team packed in more than that. In 2002, a stadium record of 65,184 fans attended the Minnesota-Iowa game. In 2008, against their rival Wisconsin Badgers, 65,089 fans were there to witness a heartbreaking Gophers loss by 3 points with a final score of 35-32. By 2010, the Vikings were the venue's sole professional franchise. In December of that year, a severe winter storm occurred, which continued on for a full day. 17 inches of snow piled up, and the conditions were so severe that workers were not permitted to go onto the roof to do the old tried-and-true method of steam and hot water to melt the snow. The roof of the Metrodome began to sag. The interior of the Metrodome was heated to 80 degrees Fahrenheit to try and combat the snowy conditions. The Vikings were scheduled to play a home game against the New York Giants there the next day, and Fox Sports had been setting up their cameras and equipment in preparation to broadcast the game. The crew noticed that water was leaking through the roof and decided to leave their cameras rolling overnight to capture what could be a roof collapse. And this turned out to be a really good decision, as this is the footage that we got.
Footage from the Metrodome last night, snow leaking in the roof, and the roof collapsed this morning. Wow. And no question the game cannot be played there. For more on the mess in Minnesota, why don't we go live to the Metrodome and Pam Oliver to get the latest. Pam?
Well, Kurt, we were just allowed in the building not too long ago, and it is just something to see. I've never seen anything quite like it. That huge hole that you see behind me, well, that's a breach that occurred around 5 o'clock in the morning. Crews have been out here trying to start the repairs, but you kind of wonder what for. Actually, the game has been moved to Detroit. It will be played at 7 o'clock tomorrow night.
That's honestly some of the craziest footage ever, and that torn piece of fabric just waving in the wind behind Pam Oliver, that's crazy. The game between the Vikings and Giants was postponed, of course, and scheduled for the following day at Ford Field in Detroit. A couple of days later, another panel ripped open, which caused more snow to fall into the stadium. This meant that the home game scheduled for the following week would also have to be moved, this time to the University of Minnesota's TCF Bank Stadium, which had opened the year before in 2009. The roof collapse created problems with the Gophers baseball team the following spring as well, forcing them to reschedule several games, and all Big Ten home games were moved to Target Field. The damage was so extensive that the entire Metrodome roof needed to be replaced at a cost of $18 million. By August of 2011, the repairs had been completed, but it was clear that the Metrodome was on borrowed time. And soon, the Minnesota state legislature approved a new Vikings stadium to be built on the same site of the Metrodome. The Vikings' final home game in the Metrodome was a 14-13 victory over the Detroit Lions on December 29, 2013. The next day, the process of removing seats in preparation for demolition was started, and they were auctioned off for various charities. The roof was deflated for the final time on January 18, 2014. On the morning of February 2, 2014, the steel support cables that went from one end of the roof to the other were cut down, and then the demolition crew set off 42 explosives that detached the cables from the structure itself. And this is the funny part, no one bothered to tell the citizens of Minneapolis about the fucking explosives going off, so several people called the police to report the sounds of loud explosions. On February 10, 2014, shortly after 9:15 a.m. local time, the demolition of the Metrodome's walls began. The demolition crew continued to work for months, and on April 11th, 2014, after months of work, the last wall of the Metrodome was brought down. Demolition was actually completed a month ahead of schedule, though. The Vikings played at TCF Bank Stadium, where the Gophers football team called home for the next 2 seasons, while their brand new home, US Bank Stadium, was constructed on the same site that the Metrodome had once been. The Metrodome is the only stadium ever to have hosted a Super Bowl, an MLB All-Star Game, a World Series, and a Final Four. The Metrodome was known as one of the toughest places to play due to being the loudest, even being called the Thunderdome sometimes. During the 1987 World Series, decibel levels were measured as high as 125. Now, to put that in perspective, the average threshold of pain, meaning the point where sound is so loud that it can actually cause physical pain, is typically around 120 decibels for most people. Overall, the Hubert H. Humphrey Metrodome is a cool old school stadium, definitely one that had a distinct 80s to 90s vibe to it. Honestly, it just simply was outgrown by its tenants, with all of them deciding to go a more modern route. The problems with the roof definitely didn't help, but I think that could have been overcome if the Vikings, Twins, and Gophers really wanted to do so. But like I said, they just wanted to go down a more 21st century path. If you liked this video, please leave a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike. But either way, comment for the algorithm. Peace out.